Mr. President, over the past 2 weeks, my colleagues and I have patiently listened to arguments from both the House managers and the President's counsel right here in the Senate regarding a grave allegation from the House that the President has committed an act worthy of impeachment. As a senator, Mr. President, I believe that the first and perhaps most important consideration is whether abuse of power and obstruction of Congress are impeachable offenses, as asserted by our House managers. Impeachment is a necessary and essential component of our Constitution. It serves as an important check on civil officers who commit crimes against the United States. However, our founding fathers were wise to ensure that the impeachment and the conviction of a sitting president would not be of partisan intent. Since President Trump took office, many have sought to delegitimize his presidency with partisan attacks. We've heard this right here in the Senate, and we've experienced it. This extreme effort to unseat the president, I believe, is unjustified and intolerable. Now that the Senate has heard and studied the arguments from both sides, I believe the lack of merit in the House manager's case is evident. The outcome of the impeachment trial is a foregone conclusion. Acquittal is the judgment the Senate should and I believe will render, and soon. For my part, I have weighed the House manager's case and found it wanting in fundamental aspects. I will try to explain. I believe, Mr. President, that their case does not allege an impeachable offense. Even if the facts are as they have stated, the managers have failed, I believe, as a matter of constitutional law to meet the exceedingly high bar for removal of the president as established by our founding fathers, the framers of the Constitution. In their wisdom, the framers rejected vague grounds for impeachment, offensive like we've heard here, maladministration, for fear that it would, in the words of Madison, result in a presidential tenure during the pleasure of the Senate. Abuse of power, one of the charges put forward here by the House managers, is a concept as vague and susceptible to abuse, I believe, as maladministration. If you take just a minute or two to look at the definitions of abuse and mal, they draw distinct similarities. Mal, a prefix of Latin origin, means bad, evil, wrong. Abuse, also of Latin origin, means to wrongly use or to use for a bad effect. There's a kinship between mal and abuse. As the framers rejected, in their wisdom, maladministration, I believe that they too would reject the non-criminal abuse of power. Instead, the framers, as the presiding officer knows, the framers provided for impeachment only in a few limited cases: treason, bribery, and high crimes and misdemeanors. Only those offensive justify taking the dire step of removing a duly elected president from office and permanently taking his name off the ballot. This institution, the U.S. Senate, I believe, should not lower the constitutional bar and authorize their theory of impeachment for abuse of power. It's simply not an impeachable offense, in my judgment. Their criteria for removal centers not on the president's actions, but on their loose perception of his motivations. If the Senate endorses this approach, we will dramatically transform the impeachment power as we have known it over the years. We will forever turn this grave constitutional power into a tool for adjudicating policy disputes and political disagreements among all of us. The framers, in their wisdom, cautioned us against this dangerous path, and I believe the Senate will heed their warning. The other article, the House manager's obstruction of Congress claim, is similarly flawed. Congress's investigative and oversight powers are critical tools, and we use them in ensuring our system of checks and balances. But those powers are not absolute. The President, too, as head of a co-equal branch of government, enjoys certain privileges and immunities from congressional fact-finding. That is his constitutional right and has been the right of former presidents from both parties. The President's mere assertion of privileges and immunities is not impeachable. It's not an impeachable offense. Endorsing otherwise would be unprecedented and would ignore the past practices of administrations of both parties. Adopting otherwise would drastically undermine the separation of powers enshrined in our Constitution. This was not what our framers intended. Mr. President, nowhere in the Constitution, as you know, or in the federal statute is abuse of power or obstruction of Congress listed as a crime. Nowhere. What constitutes an impeachable offense is not left to the discretion of the Congress. We cannot expand, I believe, on the scope of actions that could be deemed impeachable beyond that which the framers intended. What we really have here, I believe, is nothing more than the abuse of the power of impeachment itself by the Democratic House. Doesn't our country deserve better? The President certainly deserves better. And today I'm proud to stand and repudiate those very weak impeachment efforts, and I will accordingly vote to acquit the President on both sides, both articles. Mr. President, my hope is that in the future Congress will reject this episode and instead choose to be guided by the Constitution and the words of our framers. Mr. President, basically I believe it's a time to move on. We know that the American economy is booming. The United States is projecting strength and promoting peace abroad, and the President is unbowed. And I believe the American people see all of this. At the end of the day, Mr. President, the ultimate judgment rests in their hands. In my judgment, that is just as it should be. With that, I yield the floor.